So David and Megan, the book, I appreciate it took a while to come together, but what first sparked the idea? When did you know that you were ready to take these ideas to a wider audience, you believed in them enough, and you were ready to start writing?
Thanks so much, Anthony, and thank you so much for organizing this. Sorry about the little squeal there. Yeah, so also before we start, thanks to BookBar, and they sell caffeine and alcohol, which are two things that make us way funnier. So imbibe, please.
Also, this is like my dream. So I'm not really a bar person. I'm much more a bookstore person. So to be able to merge the two and have a social interaction like together is awesome. So I feel like a lot of people in the room probably feel that way. So thank you. We're just really happy to be here.
But as it relates to the book, I mean, let's start with like the most important point, which is we don't know anything. And so I want to make it clear that we're not here from a place of wisdom or understanding ourselves or the world very well. We're just here to try to tell you that it's okay not to have those answers too. And if someone tells you that they have those answers, they're probably either a narcissist or don't think hard enough about it. And so what we saw in coaching, so we were not planning to become running coaches because we thought we had some wisdom or we thought it would be a profession. We just started running coaching as a thing on the side that we were doing for friends for free. And the crazy thing we saw right off the bat is that what we thought was going to be a lot of numbers ended up being a lot of emotions and thoughts about existence. Like all the same things that the people in here that aren't runners are facing are things runners are facing, but athletes, because we're using our bodies in a way that we get daily feedback on our physical nature, we're just a lot more aware sometimes of our own mortality. And that's a pretty heavy thing to constantly be aware of. And so, yeah, I mean, through coaching we saw emotional breakdowns, people being admitted for eating disorders, every psychological issue you can imagine, but way short of that, pretty much ubiquitous across the board. We saw people just going through the day-to-day struggle of life. And we wanted to try to write a book that, added a little bit of understanding to that thing that a lot of people think about, but you might not see on Instagram pages.
I was telling Anthony this earlier, but the book is structured in two parts. The first part is kind of our baby. We spent the most time on it, and it goes into more of the mental aspects of running and the process and kind of understanding these deeper things into running and life. And then the second part is your quintessential training book. And what I told Anthony is that we actually pitched the book because we had to as a quintessential training book. And so if we could have spent all of our time, I think the first part is the most important part and it's the most meaningful to us. And so that's probably where most of the conversation will fall tonight, is kind of like the mental approach of running and the journey of being a happy runner. And then in that journey, I think through SWAB, we've seen that a lot of athletes aren't happy all the time. And that's how we are too. That's how pretty much everyone is. And what I mentioned to Anthony earlier was that if we can be happy 90% of the time, that's awesome. Because to appreciate the full spectrum of running emotions, you have to go through everything. You have to go through the lowest lows to appreciate the highest highs. And once you have that understanding of experiencing the full runner's emotions, that's really helpful.
You want a fun moment. How about the publisher? So they initially approached us about a book, and we were like, sure, we'll write a book. And so we sent them just a very short rundown of what it was going to be. And it was basically the second part of the book, if you've read it yet. And then we sent them a draft that was not like they expected. So the email we got back was just, David, we need to talk on the phone. But I think that they just suffered from a sunk cost problem and they couldn't axe the book because it was too much investment already in it. So that's the lesson, is like, just go for it and see what happens. Unless you hated that part of the book, in which case I'm sorry.
So I think before we specifically dive into those rules for happy running, it might be helpful. I'd like to read a very short passage from the book that I feel like really captures the spirit of your running and coaching philosophy, just so everybody has a better understanding of where you're both coming from. So going to the book, a closed system, like a long-term relationship or a running life, loses energy over time. Entropy is often summarized in the phrase, all things fall apart. And that's true. All things do fall apart, unless energy enters the system. For love, it's all about bringing energy into the bond that strengthens it, even as everything else changes and falls apart around it. That's why long-term relationships require a renewed daily commitment, and it's why a running life requires an evolving appreciation of the joy each day. So can you each expand on this train of thought a little bit and how this worked itself into the heart of your training philosophy? This is kind of your ethos.
So I love entropy because I love chemistry, but entropy is so important because life is chaos. Things are going to happen that you can't predict. You're going to step up to the line of a race and things might go wrong. You know, you could poop your pants, there's these, any number of things that happen. And it's funny because actually I was on a podcast and told a story about actually pooping my pants as a 13-year-old, and it got a ton of Twitter comments.
When we got engaged, so she
Whoa.
I'm going to tell the story. 2 minutes before I was going to propose, she literally just steps off the side of the trail, drops like a horse, and then just kept running. And that's where I learned that she was the woman for me.
We probably shouldn't touch the story with the word drinking. Yeah. But anyway, so there's a lot of chaos in a running life, like pooping before you get engaged and all these things. And if you don't embrace it, it can become a really long running life. And the part about entropy is that you kind of need that to experience everything and to appreciate it all. And if you don't put work into appreciating those moments, it can become really hard to be a runner long term. Because these things are challenging. You know, it's really tough when your husband tells these stories at a running event, but you need to put that work in to have a sustainable running life.
Yeah, and I think that gets a little bit back to the idea of happy. Like, the word happy is in there, but when we say happy, we don't mean like puppies and unicorns and like rainbows and things are great. What we mean is looking at the complexity of life, like staring into the abyss, and then coming out of that and being okay with who you are, understanding that complexity. And so, I mean, the idea of the abyss is the ultimate in entropy, because we're all heading to a certain place where, 1,000 years from now, all of our molecules will be scattered across the earth. And so, that is a microcosm of what we're all living with every day. This thing where energy is just pulling us away from what we care about. So what I challenge everyone in this room is, like, think about, the people you love, like your relationship. I mean, we all have that, we all understand, like, after a few years, like, you're doing things like telling poop stories in front of audience. I mean, like, essentially, things become room temperature, right? Everything becomes room temperature over time, no matter what it is, unless you're heating it up. And so, that applies to relationships, it applies to your job, it applies to anything you're passionate about, but it especially applies to running. Because in running, if you do anywhere near enough to reach even 10% of your potential, everything will become mundane over time. Every day you're going to be doing very similar things. Even the highest mountains become things that are just second nature. And so unless you really learn to appreciate that and try to, like, remind yourself constantly why you appreciate it, then it's all just going to fall to crap over time.
So happy runner rule number 1 is to simply embrace the process. Now, you write in the book, focus on the process, you may be content. Focus on results and you'll just never be satisfied. Now, a lot of runners may read this and think, well, I want to compete, I want to push myself, I want to reach my potential. And David and Megan, you both, when you race, when you toe the line, you go in with those expectations as well. But this chapter is a lot about balance. It's a lot about the dichotomy. You talk about the conquer the village and subjugate the villagers mentality, and that it can't be that way all the time. But there do seem to be some conflicting motivations here. Can you explore that a little bit and how a runner would find that balance?
Awesome. Do you want to?
Yeah.
So what he said there about the, like, conquer the village and subjugate the villagers thing, it's kind of like think about, like, Conan the Barbarian. It's like you conquer one village and it's like, great. And then, they don't stop there. It's like, conquer the next one and conquer the next one. And I think one of the things we saw with our own athletics, but especially with our athletes, is no result, no destination is ever going to satisfy someone and make them any more content. In fact, like, we've been fortunate enough to have athletes win races like Western States and Hard Rock and all these biggest races in the world. And what we find is that often they launch into phases of pretty serious, like, unhappiness, depression, things like that. And it all gets back to like, there is no finish line. Like it's just this long-term process. So if you elevate any evaluation of outcomes, that goes for races, that goes for job promotions, that literally goes for anything you can imagine, like it's just you're gonna be way less happy eventually. And we see it all the time. That doesn't mean you can't care. Races can structure this daily process that you love, right? So like we enter races, we encourage our athletes to do it all the time, but like it's still just like 1 or 2% of your long-term stuff. So really think about like what is your perfect day? Like what is the day that you want to try to do? Make decisions that structure that day, and don't like decide that the race. Remind yourself that outcome doesn't matter at all, and that it goes for job promotions and things like that too. Even goes for marriages. Like literally everything you can imagine. It's just a way of structuring the day-to-day.
We have a line in the book called "No one gives a crap about your marathon PR," and that did not trend well on Twitter. Some people enjoyed it, but there are some people who are like, that is not a good line. But it's an inherent contradiction that we have in the book, because when you think about yourself in the context of the universe, we're all pretty small, unless you have nuclear codes, in which case you should probably be pretty careful with what you're doing. But we're so small, and that should give yourself the opportunity to take risks and to try things, because honestly, like, no one outside of your mom and maybe your few best friends are going to care. And your mom and your few best friends should probably care no matter what the result is, no matter if you poop your pants in the race. But the inherent contradiction in that too is that it's okay to care, because if we didn't care about anything in the world, then things would be meaningless. And so it's an interesting point to think about the fact that, well, perhaps no one cares about me, but it's okay to also care about the process too.
Yeah, and it all adds meaning. Like every little bit. I mean, one thing that we tell our athletes and people in this room too, like, what we dare you this year to make your goal just to fail so spectacularly, not just at running, but like at other things that matter to you a lot. Like to put yourself out there enough that you can fail and then still be okay with it and realize, oh wait, that's actually kind of interesting, right? Like swirling around like one of the glasses of wine that you have and that, failure, hints of elderberry. You know what I mean? Like just to embrace the whole nature of it. We have a few of our athletes in the room, and like, each of them has had triumphs that are just so exciting. But on the side of that, they've also had really major downtimes. Injury being one big one, but also things like, like interpersonal issues, everything you could ever imagine. And one thing I'm really proud of the people in this room for is that like they've come out of that loving themselves more. And that's kind of the idea of the book, is that you take all of this crap of life and reach a place of self-acceptance. And self-acceptance includes the shitting in the woods part, like the shitty parts. Oh crap. Not very good at self-acceptance.
This is a distinguished bar.
Yeah, I feel like a bar is a better location for my syntax than like a running store.
What I was going to say is that the other nice thing about failure is that it gets easier with time. It's like a track workout. It's like, you go do 4 by 2 minutes, and it gets a lot easier, when you do that week after week. If you go do 4 by failure week after week, it gets a lot easier. So it's like, give yourself the opportunity to fail. Take risks and see what happens. And I promise it gets easier, because we've both failed quite a lot.
It's my biggest skill.
So you talk about handwriting goals and affirmations on sticky notes in this chapter, and you suggest someone write down, well, what kind of person do I want to be? And then what kind of runner do I want to be? And then what do my long-term goals look like? And you use the example of Kat Bradley, one of your SWAT team athletes who very notably, as a massive underdog, won Western States in 2017. And you talk about how Kat's goals evolved. That it wasn't obsessing over the sub 20-hour finish, or it wasn't to win the race, but that her goal going in was to be the healthiest and happiest runner possible. And the lesson from the chapter is kind of, your results are out of your control to some degree. They're going to happen the way they're going to happen. Your mindset's what you can control. So can you maybe expand on that a little bit, and how, your philosophy on goal setting, maybe how you communicate with your athletes?
So I think the big point there, we have this thing about affirmations in the book, but basically it's to have the courage to like be okay with yourself, which is the opposite of how a lot of us are raised, how society wants us to be, like how life is structured. As crazy as that sounds, like a lot of what we do is structured to make us think we're inadequate, whether it's work or running or all these other things. Like you're not, where you are right now is not like the right place. You need to keep working to get to some other place that is going to be the right place. And so the point of all this stuff is like, no, where you are right now is where you're supposed to be, especially if you're scared. But like, to be super okay with that. Like, no matter where you are, like if you're a runner and you're in a boot right now, it's totally fine, it's where you're supposed to be. And like, to be okay with that, to strive for these things, not because it is like, where you are now is not adequate, but because the act of striving is enjoyable in and of itself. And so, yeah, like as it relates to Kat, Kat's a great story because, so we met her in August 2016. So it was after a race. It was at the US 50K Championships in Marin in San Francisco. And she came up and she was not thrilled and talked to us for the first time. And we said a lot of the BS that we're saying now. And then she reached back out on Facebook Messenger a couple weeks later and was like, hey, are you interested in like just seeing what we can do? And we said, yeah, but like the only thing that we're gonna say is like the same thing that Megan alluded to a second ago. We don't care about the results, like it doesn't matter to us. And she was willing to buy in at that outset. And the coolest thing happened within a month or two. It wasn't training, like we didn't change that much. Like all of a sudden she started to become a world beater. Just by deciding in her own head that it was okay to care but not care. It was okay to like put herself out there and embrace this whole process. So that story unfolds that Western States, for those that don't know, has a lottery system. She had one ticket into the lottery, which is basically like an actual lottery. So it was like 1% or 2% of being selected. She was selected to run the race. Great. So we trained for it, but honestly, we weren't training to win. Like we made it. We talked a ton about it. We never talked about results the whole time, even for this elite athlete. And she only did. I mean, it's a lot of miles, but relative to her competitors, like Camille Herron, who was mentioned, she did 60 miles a week in the build in the big 8-week build before the race, which is a lot, but not. I mean, her competitors are doing 120 at least. And then, so the website iRunFar had a prediction contest that said, got everyone in the community to like vote on who would win. And exactly one person picked Kat, and that was her boyfriend. It wasn't even me. Which, unfortunately, it's like if there were two, I could have said I was the second one. But no, she knew that it was him. And then at mile 15, she came through and she was in like 25th place. It was a very snowy year, and we were just being really conservative. But she's there. I mean, you're in 25th place at this race. Like you have no shot. Like you not only do you have no shot to win, like you have no shot to be top 10. And no one moves up at that point, and like that much. And you know, because she had this framework that she was okay with where she was. I mean, I remember we were tracking the race. We were driving from California to Colorado, and there were all these pictures of her with the biggest smile back there, and it's like, wow, she's where she should be. I thought she was going to finish like 15th or 20th at that point, you know. But I'm like, she's happy. That's awesome. And then, sure enough, no one else passed her the rest of the race. She passed all the women and like almost all the men, and she won. That's not to say that like you're gonna win if you have this mentality, though you might. But what it is to say is that like, you know, by giving yourself the grace to fail and to go for it, you're capable of way more than you know. And I think that might end up being like, if we have a secret for our team and like the success, it's this mental switch of letting yourself like reach your potential, not trying to force yourself.
I think an interesting follow-up to that too is what happened when Kat won Western States. And something that a lot of people don't think about is that when you win Western States coming out of nowhere, your life actually gets a lot harder. Because all of a sudden you're this person who was an underdog, and now you show up to races and everyone is like, did you deserve to win Western States? You know, people are like vultures. Once you have a good race, people are like, oh, what's coming next? What are you gonna do next? And what I was most impressed with Kat is that after Western States, she actually didn't race for a long time. So David knows better, but it was about 6 months before she raced. Well, she went for a FKT at the Grand Canyon, which was amazing. But most people would have responded to that differently. They would have gotten back out there and been like, I need to prove this to people that this wasn't a fluke. And to me, that showed that Kat's goals were internally focused. And when we have athletes set goals, we really want to make sure that they're internally driven and they're not driven, to please those vultures out there, because that's just like a never-ending cycle. And so I was just so impressed that Kat did that, and was really inspired with how she handled everything.
Yeah, but if she was here with us, she would tell you about like the hard parts that is ensued in the next year. And so when she's talking about the external validation, I mean, the people that love you and care about you don't care. Like, they just care about you. Like, the worst thing you can ever do is apologize when you have a bad race. Like, don't. Like, the people that actually give a crap, like, love you no matter what. But the people that you're trying to validate there have a memory of fruit flies, is like a line from the book. Like, if that. The comments on Kat that Kat received and that others have received, especially female athletes, it's like infuriating. And, so if you're doing a race or whatever, and we want you, like, go try to win. Like, run as hard as you can, brace your heart out. But know that, like, whether you finish first or last or DNF, like, it doesn't change anything, and there is no light at the end of the tunnel. There's just more tunnel. So get a light out, in the tunnel, and embrace that part of it.
So rule number 2 is know your why. And I think it's interesting because today running is so often distilled to a perfect Instagram photo, to your Strava stats, to the percentage at the top of your Ultra sign-up page. And I'm interested to hear more about your thoughts on the positives and negatives of incorporating social media into your running life, and kind of how you guys help your athletes keep their eyes on the prize.
So social media can be an awesome community. And I was telling Anthony earlier that if you view everyone in your community, it's a lot easier to be on social media. I think there's a tendency to be on social media and be like, hey, I'm going to compare myself to so-and-so. They ran 20 miles today and I ran 10. Or, maybe I'm not going to root for so-and-so because, I don't agree with their methodology. And that's just exhausting. You can spend so much energy doing that, and ultimately it's not good for you. So I think that social media, when used for the right reasons, is really powerful. I mean, you can identify with people who are going through hard times, and it's awesome. And same thing with Strava, too. Strava is like, you can have daily feedback over everything you do, and that's tough. And so we encourage athletes to be really mindful of all that.
Yeah, so if everyone is a teammate, you always win. And so another challenge is, and this is like one of the hardest parts because it goes against our evolutionary nature, is to root for people that you don't know. And root for the people you know especially. But really try to incorporate that because it's the most uplifting thing you can ever do. But it goes against what we do because we all, whether you run or not, see a Facebook post, let's say, where someone had something triumphant happen to them. And you know them tangentially, and part of your monkey brain's like, no, I don't like that. You're just not a fan. But to be mindful of that, that's normal. But to, at the same time, okay, no. What I'm going to try to do there is comment or just internalize the thought of, heck yeah, that's awesome. This person did this thing that's meaningful to them. And if you start to do that, I think the kind of really cool thing you might see over time is that you get lifted up a lot too. So this goes for your work or anything else. The people that are essentially self-absorption in any manner always tears you down, always. We all have that tendency. There's people on different parts of the spectrum, but we all are the center of the universe to ourselves. It's the only way the brain can work. But so to counter that as much as you can, and really try to use these exercises to embrace and lift up others.
I think the other important thing too is that social media is a choice for most of us. I mean, there's a lot of really important and awesome people in the world who don't even use social media, and it doesn't fundamentally change their outlook. And you also have the power to see what you want to see on social media. So I follow a very large number of golden retrievers, llamas, and babies accounts because it significantly impacts my well-being. And then on Twitter, I have Sarah Silverman is great on Twitter. So it's I have some great comedians on Twitter and some really cute things on Instagram, and it just helps. And then I didn't know about this until we went to a dinner the other day. But there's a mute button on Instagram too, and it is awesome. It's important to view people in your community, but if you really can't, that's okay too.
Yeah, a little bit of hate can be fun.
So rule number 3 is power yourself with kindness. And there's a really cool anecdote in this chapter. Megan reveals that she's pretty competitive by nature, and she talks about the 2017 North Face 50 miler, in which she's just coincidentally racing alongside Claire Gallagher, who's a swap athlete. And about 15 miles in, Claire starts pulling away. And Megan could look at that and go, wow, she's better than me. Wow, I'm inadequate. But instead, kind of flips the switch and goes, wow, David's a great coach. And is able to change your thinking on the spot. So maybe you could expand on that story a little bit, and what, for each of you, what your self-talk looks like when you're out there in a race or out there in a training run, and you can make that 1 second decision to change your thinking, to change your perspective.
So I'll start by telling a story in 2013 when David started SWAP. So I was sitting on my computer just doing med school stuff, and David comes over and tells me he's going to coach an elite athlete. And this is Corinne Malcolm, who some of you may recognize. She finished 10th this year at Western State. She's just had a great progression. And David told me he was going to make her a world-class athlete.
No, I did not say that. I said she was going to be happy and fulfilled in the process.
And the world-class athlete. And I was like, wait a second here, like, you're going to be training elite female athletes, and I'm going to be racing against them. This seems like a problem. I really don't want you training my competitors. I had a lot of faith in David as a coach at this point, which is a good thing. And so we actually it was the biggest argument that we've ever had, besides ping pong, which gets back to my competitive nature. And it was a really interesting point in our relationship, and in my relationship with being competitive and being a member of the community. And so over time, I felt like in order to survive, because David kept taking on more elite female athletes, I just had to view them as members of my team and root for them. And it became more natural over time, but it really wasn't put to test until North Face, which is when I raced Claire Gallagher, who David coached. And we ran together through mile 15, and then she pulled away from me. And I remember when she pulled away from me, I was like, David, I can't believe this. It's like all those 5 by 3 minute hill workouts that are working really well for her, huh? And, but it was for the first time in my life, it was a different switch that flipped in my brain. I was really happy for Claire, and very happy for David too. And it's funny, it made me so happy. And for me, that was a turning point, because I was like, wait, I'm getting way more positive emotions rooting for people than I am trying to be competitive with them. And the rest of the race, every person I passed, I was like, you're doing amazing, you're doing a great job. And subsequently, every person who passed me, I was like, oh, great job. A little bit more out of breath. And that to me was so meaningful. And it's been really helpful for me over time.
Yeah, I mean, Megan is the best teacher, but the greatest teacher is right across the street right now. So some people in this room have met Addie Dog, who came in at a very clutch time in our lives. So in 2012, we were just driving in North Carolina back when we were at Duke, and we were just in a middle of a back road, and we had never had dogs or anything like that, and we see a sign on the side of the road that just says free pups. And so Megan's like, well, I have to pee, which is what Megan always says. And so we pulled over, and we were just looked at the pups while we were there. And this little fur ball that was probably like 5 weeks old was just going crazy for every single person that passed. Like, all of her brothers were much more as they should have been, normal in the back of the crate. And this dog was just going crazy, and it was so strange. And so Megan fell in love right there, and we took this dog back home. And we learned that there is no such thing as a free dog that grew up without supervision on the farm. Dog has been very expensive. But what we saw is that initial spark, and the people in this room, in the past events she would just be out here, but that spark just lit a fire, and it's like everywhere she's gone, she just passes that on to people. It's this love, this enthusiasm, this kindness that she just spreads without discrimination whatsoever. So there's a story in the book about when we moved to the West Coast, she was in this new place in this little 250 square foot apartment or something, and she's just sitting at the window all day, just looking outside, tail wagging. And over time, people just started to see that tail wagging, and so people just stare in, they didn't know where inside. I was like, what's that dog doing? And then eventually people would be like, can we come? And then, so every day, Addie would have like 6 standing appointments with people that would come. So, and then over time, it got to the point that like the neighborhood would just line up to say hi to this dog that was just so crazy affectionate. So the roundabout lesson here is, we'll introduce her after the event, so it all makes more sense. But the roundabout lesson here is that by internalizing a little bit of that in your own life, I mean, we're not dogs, we view the world a little bit more complex. I mean, we talked about death. I doubt she's thinking about that. Though maybe she sometimes doesn't get dinner, which is almost as bad. But yeah, so like, if you can internalize a little bit of that in your life, not like the simplicity of it, but the complexity of it, of viewing a complex world, coming out the other end and being kind and enthusiastic anyway, so much can change. And that's been one of the most important things for us as humans, but then also that we try to help our athletes with a little bit over time, is by doing that, not only are you going to be a little bit happier for obvious reasons, you're going to perform way better physically. The sports psychology, the neuroscience of it, the stuff that Megan knows way more about, all supports it. And yeah, so we've seen that like kindness and positivity are the ultimate performance enhancers.
I think the other thing too is that there's about 2% of the population that does not like Addie Dog, and that's totally fine. I mean, people are entitled to their opinions on dogs, we get that. We actually didn't even like dogs until we met Addie Dog. We just viewed dogs as people that are things that would jump on you during a run. But it's important not to cater yourself to those 2% of people. So even though some people might not respond positively to kindness and enthusiasm, that's okay. There's no reason to go around catering yourself to those. One of the points on this is actually on Amazon. So if you ever write a book, there's an important point not to look at Amazon for your reviews. That's something that your publisher should tell you. So I don't. I'm like very strict. I'm like, I'm not looking at these things. But David looks at it like every 4 hours. So he gives me he gives me updates. But we had one-star Amazon review that was like, who is this talking dog in this book? This all caps has to go. This dog is terrible. So it just goes to show that like, you do your best to be enthusiastic and kind, but not everyone is going to like that, and that's okay. Just be you.
The other 1-star review was, they're really good. I feel like there should be like a 1-star review Amazon theater where you just go and like dramatic. We should actually just turn this into a dramatic reading of this too. But the best was definitely, these people need an editor. And agree is all I have to say.
But kindness is tricky, and it can almost be easier to be kind to someone else than yourself. And I think any runner has beaten themselves up after a run, has maybe even lived and died with their training runs, right? After a great run, it's the highest highs. After a terrible run, it's the lowest lows. I'm sure you see this in yourselves, you see this in your SWAT team athletes. How can runners overcome this? And how do you help your athletes overcome what you call conditional self-worth?
So, yeah, I mean, it really gets to the heart of all of this stuff, in that what we saw when we started, and what was the genesis of this book eventually, is that so many more people through running found self-loathing than we ever thought possible. We had our own experiences where we thought that was something that we dealt with, but it's so common. Not just like, oh, I might not be fast enough as a runner, but like, oh, I don't like my body. I don't like this physical form I'm in. I don't like myself. Not depression necessarily, like clinical depression, though there is plenty of that. It's more like, I'm just not worthwhile in this moment. And that sucks. Like, no matter what you get away from this, just know that like if you're going through that now, you're not alone, and tons of people are there with you, including like some of the best athletes in the world who might not show that on Instagram. So in terms of like moving on from that feeling, the first step is to like know it's normal and know it's okay, and know you're still going to have those days, not just days, but like sometimes longer than that. But then more than that, it's to like figure out a framework, and this is kind of what the book gets at, to cut yourself as much slack as humanly possible. Not just in running, but in life. In running, there's a lot of specific ways you can do that are pretty complicated. But yeah, I mean, the basic thing here is like, all of this stuff is so hard. I mean, gosh, what you're doing right now, Anthony, is like impossibly hard to me. Like to summarize this whole thing and interview us. and you're doing amazing. But like, you know, what we're doing is pretty hard. What you guys are doing to life is not easy. And to like understand that and to give yourself, like, cut yourself some slack. Like if you don't get the final Jeopardy question, you're not gonna say you suck. Like, it's like, those are hard. And to like approach everything like that with this like kindness to yourself over time. But easier said than done.
I think in that process too is trying to laugh at yourself and finding humor in things. So there's a great saying that comedy is tragedy plus time. And the time element is really key there because it can take some time to be able to laugh at yourself and to understand that. So this Wednesday, I've been struggling with a hamstring tear. And so David's smiling over here. But this Wednesday, I probably cried for 3 hours thinking I was never going to run again. And it was terrible. But by Thursday, actually it was probably Friday, I was laughing at myself. And that's something.
She was like, do you have kids? Like, should we do that now? Like, that would be good timing, right?
I was serious. That's how bad it got on Wednesday. But it's like, it's super funny now. And it's like, you know, some of the best stories come from the worst moments. And I think the older I've gotten, and I'm only 28, so it's like, you know, I might have some really funny moments by the time I'm 40. But the older I've gotten, the more I realize that like these opportunities are just great to laugh at yourself. And when you view it that way, it's kind of fun.
Plus, crying is a great ab workout.
So rule number 4, the last one, is kind of a reality check, and it's probably my favorite. It's that running is not all puppies and unicorns, and that if you're committed to running, it's going to be challenging. If it's not just it's a bucket list item to get through a marathon, maybe you might not get to that place, but if you want this to be your lifestyle, if you want to keep running, you're going to hit some brick walls. It's tough. And the chapter explores mental health a little bit. And it's interesting, there seems to be sort of a spectrum where some runners seek to achieve a Zen-like state through running, while others are literally exercising their demons through running. So maybe you could touch on that spectrum a little bit, kind of what you see with your athletes, and you know, what your thoughts are on different approaches for different people.
Yeah, so I think maybe our background first would be good to start with. So I grew up, my mom I had dealt with lots of depression, things like that, so I was aware of these issues a little bit, but you know, a kid, I didn't really, it was just like, stupid mom, you know, all that stuff. So a specific moment I remember where it first kind of dawned on me a little bit more about the specifics of these issues is in 2010. So I was in first year of law school. I had come from a science background, didn't really know what I was doing. And in law school, if you don't know, they do Socratic method. So it's like, those calling someone in the room. And I had never been like, you know, super nervous about things, but all of a sudden on that very first day, my heart rate just started going up and up and up. So we're sitting there and, you know, this big lecture hall, chances of actually being called on are almost 0. And my heart rate's probably like 160, just like sitting there. I'm like, okay, just get through this, get through this, get through this. And the professor called in someone else. And I was like, whew. And my heart rate didn't go down. And it was 2 weeks where, you know, I was having these essentially like, not only that, but like heart palpitations, like all this thing. I wasn't stressed about anything specific, but what that probably was an anxiety, some sort of anxiety like episode. And I got very lucky because what happened 2 weeks later, we went and had ice cream for the first time and we met. But, you know, I think that probably, I tend towards that baseline of being like a little bit more anxious, having those issues. And Megan has her own stuff.
My first foray into running actually occurred in kindergarten when I got into the kindergarten school door and just decided to run. And I tried to run home. And this would happen every day. I think it went on for about 2 months before the school staged an intervention. It was like, if your child's going to go to school here, she has to stop running. But that was essentially a proxy for social anxiety. And that continued through school until I gave a Gettysburg Address speech. I think it was in 5th grade. And I'm standing up in front of a crowd. It's actually smaller than it was today, so, you know, 5th grade made me proud of myself today. And I forgot my lines. And ever since that day, presentations, events like this, I'm actually getting better with this book. This is one of the small perks of writing a book. I would be super nervous. And that social anxiety would kind of transmit into regular anxiety in my normal life. And it was hard. But I think that David and I, like, through these experiences and through coaching athletes, we see that everyone has a story like this. Maybe it's social anxiety, maybe it's depression, maybe it's bipolar disorder, eating disorders. There's like, you know, a whole list of things. And actually Shannon Payne is in the room, and we had an email that went out to athletes, asking athletes, you know, what are some things you struggle with? And she asked David to add a very important question to the end of that. And that was, do you have any demons? And we have learned so much about runners through that question, and we're so thankful for Shannon for that. And so we've heard everything, including one person who told us a literal demon, and I was like, wow, that's it. I don't think she quite understood that question. Yeah, it was a very literal demon that came out in a 100-mile race. But I think through that question, we've gotten to see that so many runners struggle with these things. And so chapter 4, which is the mental health chapter, was so important for us to write. And it kind of sets the stage that really no one is a happy runner 100% of the time, and that's okay. And that sometimes if you're dealing with things like depression or anxiety, sometimes you can't even fathom thinking about being happy, and that's okay too.
And running doesn't solve any of these problems. Like, running doesn't solve anything. It can be treatment, it can be one method to it, but like being able to put on running shoes and go outside and get some endorphins, it's, you know, it's not ever going to cure whatever you're struggling with. And that doesn't necessarily have to be things like depression or anxiety. It can just be like normal, like malaise, blah, you know, like all the stuff that literally everyone in this room probably deals with in some way. And so, like, the reason that this chapter is the most important is because we talk so much about things like puppies, like these simple, like trying to be as kind as you can and lift everyone up around you, and like everyone's on your team and all this other stuff. And it's like, how is that even possible when the world is collapsing in on you and your heart rate's 160? It's like, it's not. So, you know, what we found in coaching is, I guess it helps a little bit to understand how we coach. Our athletes in the room could probably say this better, but so, you know, we have like a running plan and stuff, but each day the athletes write about what they did, about their lives if they want, and we check in every day with every athlete, like including holidays and weekends. So over time, I mean, at first, you know, every athlete has different barriers, but over time, you know, that's way more times than I've talked to my like brother, let's say, or something, you know? So you get to know people really well, like, or at least understand a version of them. And what we saw is that, like, this is just life. You know, this isn't runners in particular, though runners do we all spend a lot more time in our own heads, so we're more aware of these issues maybe. But it's just like, it is life. And that makes it way more interesting to us, and that's what motivated the book. Because we didn't have time to write a book or expertise to write a book, but we kind of wanted people to know what we see a little bit. Because like, we know that if we could just share one day of what we see, like behind the scenes, people would feel so much better about their own lives, just because of like the perspective it gives you on others. So hopefully the book does a little bit of that. Our goal was that maybe after you finish the book, like, it feels like you just had one of those late night conversations where like you're both a little tired, and then, you know, maybe you've had some drinks or something, and then you just get like a hug, you know? Not from us necessarily, kind of like hugging yourself.
I think, David, you made a really interesting point about running not being a standalone treatment for some of these mental health issues, and I think that's really important because running is a great pick-me-up, and if you're struggling with these things, it can be helpful. But I think that we often try to get a lot of our athletes struggling with these things to go to therapy, and we found that therapy is just one of the most amazing things you can do for yourself if you're struggling. I joked to David the other day that we should really have a fee, like we should get some like cut out of like therapy referrals, because we're doing quite well there. But it's just so powerful for people, because say you're using running as a boost when you're struggling with these things. What happens if you get injured? What happens if you race a 100-mile race and all of a sudden your cortisol is through the roof and you're not feeling good and you have post-race blues? It's just going to be magnified. And so by having these open conversations with athletes and then encouraging them to have open conversations with people who know far more than we do, I think it's been really helpful. And that's something we found really powerful.
Yeah, and I mean, independent of therapy, like, the idea is that, like, the world between our two ears is like a dark and scary place. Like, if you've seen Game of Thrones, it's like dark and full of terrors.
I thought you were gonna say full of boobs.
Not too many Game of Thrones watchers. That was a very good joke. Dragons too. But the idea is that like between your 2 years, it's like that for everyone. Like, I mean, to a certain extent, like if you go to a cabin and are just alone thinking, like it goes to some dark places no matter who you are over time. So the goal is to escape that world a little bit and let it out, you know, because once you leave that and expand and encompass like, you know, this room, the community you're in, I mean, over time, like if you get to like some Zen transcendentalism stuff, like the universe, like big things like that, life gets so much easier. And so therapy is one way to escape that world, especially with like things that you might not even know you're going through. But it can also be a dog, it can be friends, it can be a community, it can be a lot of different things. It probably just can't be sucking it up, because sucking it up isn't going to get you very far.
Well, we're at the top of the hour, so before we jump to some Q&A, I think that's a perfect note to end it on. So let's give Megan and David another round of applause. So anybody who has a question, just feel free to raise your hand. Maybe we'll just parrot the question back in the mic so everybody can hear, and then Megan and David can take a shot at it. Yeah?
Hi, thanks so much for being here. So I listened to you guys on Pro Runner Nation today on my run. That was really fun, and basically, I just left that interview feeling like, you know, I know you're not busy or anything, but like maybe you guys should start a podcast. because really there's so much, it's sort of like wanting to, what you guys are talking about more than the nuts and bolts of, oh, here's your training plan. It's like an ethos that you kind of have to marinate in a little bit, and you work on that with your athletes that you coach, but I think that a podcast, however often you wanted to release it, to tell stories and talk about these issues, would give more people a chance to plug in. So, you know, just not to put you on the spot.
So the question was about David and Megan starting a podcast, and that maybe what they're talking about, more people need to hear long form.
So I love this question because we actually just had a 45-minute argument, 15-minute argument, 30-minute argument about starting a podcast. So I'm in the camp of wanting to start a podcast. I think we want to start a podcast about the business of endurance sports. So talking, kind of like how I built this for the endurance world. So talking to small business owners or things like Spring Energy, or even like, heck, if we could get Nike on there, that would be awesome, but that's a shot in the dark. So I think that would be really interesting, and then touching on some of like the mental aspects of like, you know, being an entrepreneur and putting yourself out there, because I think we have a number of swap athletes who are coaches, and a lot of times they don't view themselves as entrepreneurs, but they really are. And they face a lot of the same struggles that entrepreneurs do, and so I think it could be interesting for them. So thank you. That's very helpful. David can comment and rebuttal.
We worked it out ahead of time. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's very like kind of you. I guess I am just so sick of myself at this point, like in a very self-accepting way, but I'm also like, thank you all for coming. I am like, it's like, I'm saying something and I'm like, God, if this is the first exposure I'd ever had to me, is like someone in this room, like having no idea who I was, I'd think, wow, it's like making the most dismissive gesture.
Well, we were so excited about this event, but when I found out it was Saturday from 7 to 9, I was like, crap, that's a lot of pressure. Like, you know, we're responsible for like all of your well-being. That's kind of horrifying.
On Saturday night, yeah.
Yeah.
We've never been Saturday night people, so thank you so much for coming.
Other questions? No other questions?
It can also be about training.
Yeah. Over here?
So I just finished your guys' book yesterday, and I was trying, like from the beginning, you guys were talking about how it was both of your inputs the whole time, so a lot of the time I was trying to guess who was talking, which I have no idea either way. But there were like a lot of analogies. Are you guys 50-50 with the analogies, or one of you guys the analogy people?
So the question's about the analogies in the book.
There are a lot of them.
Well, David is the main analogy man. I'm kind of the one who comes in and cleans up the analogies. But actually it's a good question about writing a book together. So I think it's really important for us, we kind of set out like, what are our skills and strengths? And David is just an incredible writer. Like, I'm so lucky to have the chance to write with him. And so he did a lot of the writing, I did a lot of the synthesizing and some of the writing, but I think just kind of understanding your strengths as a team is really helpful in that process, and understanding who's going to be the analogy generator.
The tangential thing that might be related is like the process of writing a book is very similar to the process of like growing as a writer or growing as a runner or doing anything, in that like it's super daunting when you think about it all at once, but it's not daunting at all when you think about like what actually entails day to day. So when it comes to the book, I mean, you write a lot of crap, a lot of it sucks, a lot of it finds its way out. And that's kind of how the co-writing stuff worked, is that like Megan would do the first pass at like a couple of the chapters, and then by the end it would be totally different. Same with my chapters, because like you're integrating it. But that goes with like anything you're doing, is to not be intimidated by the whole of whatever the thing you're striving for is. So literally any example you can imagine. Like if anyone is meeting like a Tinder date after this, like think about like if that actually in relationship amounts to something. Think about all the things you're gonna have to do. Oh my God, not worth it. But in reality, life is so much more like lived day to day. And in the day to day, these big things become achievable and like way more fun. See, that's an analogy about Tinder. So it works.
Well, I think the cool thing about marriage too is that your voices kind of merge, and so we split chapters was how we did it. Like I think if we had segmented chapters and wrote them, it would have been tough to merge our voices, but that worked out well for us. The other cool thing is like the process of writing a book is a really fun life cycle. So it started in a lazy boy, which we found on the side of a road in our apartment in California. So we would sit at like 5 a.m., no pants, just like typing away these words that you're reading now. No pants ever, yeah. It's kind of like our apartment rules. Then we sent it off to the editor, and they gave us a lot of, actually they didn't actually give us that many edits, which was kind of horrifying. And then we didn't see it for about 3 months, and then it got published, and all of a sudden people are reading these words that we wrote in our lazy boy, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is very surreal. And then we talk at these events, and it's even more surreal. So I would say that if you're considering writing a book, it's actually really fun. You learn a lot about yourself, a lot about your partner, a lot of good analogies. So it's fun.
No pants.
Any other questions?
Can you talk a little more about the setting expectations for yourself or about the race? I think there's this common school of thought that you're supposed to visualize your success, right? You're supposed to make this vision board in the beginning of a year, and everything you put on that board is going to come true because you somehow internalize these images. And I think what you're talking about is something that I personally can really relate to, that kind of actually taking it easy and like going into and just see how it feels, and playing it by the ear actually yields better results. But I often argue with my friends about this, like having a vision board versus just kind of intuitive approach and just like, let's see how it plays out.
So the question is about intuitive training versus visualizing success.
Yes.
That's such an amazing question. Do you want to start, and I'll look up our pre-race email?
That sounds like a good plan. So I like having really big goals and big dreams that you visualize. I think long-term goals. I think that's very important, because if you don't actually believe it, you're not going to achieve it, which rhymes, so it must be right. But I think as a counterpoint to that too, it's also really important to have things that are process focused, because there is a chance, I mean, if you dream really big, there's a good chance you're not going to achieve it. And so having things like, this is how I'm going to feel at mile 5. I might not feel great, and that's okay. And so I think having both of those is a good counterbalance. I go both ways about visualizing both the negative and the positive. So some people say you should only visualize the positive, but I also think it's, for me personally, I think it's important to visualize the negative and be like, hey, this actually isn't the end of the world scenario, so that in case it does happen, you know how to do it because you visualize it and you're like, okay, I'm bonking, this is what I'm gonna do. And B, you're like, well, this is not a problem, I'll just be able to laugh about this eventually. So that's kind of the approach I take. There's probably psychologists out there who will tell you that's wrong. But I think ultimately just do whatever you find best, and that's probably best for you.
So cosign. And I'm sure you guys all came to see someone read from their phone. But so I just sent this today. So honestly, in some ways, this was the genesis of the idea for the book in the first place. This pre-race email, I mean, while we de-emphasize the importance of races, like, we don't get hired if, like, I mean, now it's a little different, but especially when we started out coaching all these pro athletes, especially, it's like, we're nobodies if, people don't have good races. So this is like the culmination of like everything for our profession, essentially, though we don't do it like that. So I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs from it. Paragraphs? Sorry, just stop me if it's too bad. Okay, swap race crew, which is our team. Your mission, if you choose to accept it, run like a puppy. That's intentionally silly. Thanks. That's intentionally silly. Let's use this as an opportunity to experience life fully, including the good and bad and everything in between, in a low-stakes setting. It's all about the stories. You all have accomplished so much to get to this point. The stories from you are mind-boggling. Those stories are what counts. You did all the work to get here. There isn't a person on this email that hasn't crushed the process. Results will be what they will be. You already won in our eyes no matter what. Training is the test, racing is the celebration. Let's celebrate. And so that's the general mission. Then it gets into a lot of like nuts and bolts of like training and race like approach. And if you have any questions about training stuff, like, I mean, that's why we had we were allowed to write the book in the first place. And then it gets to like some of the other stuff. And I'm just very briefly going to go, stop me if this is terrible. So smile every bleeping mile. We are stardust with delusions of grandeur. None of this stuff matters except the memories we make. So decide now that they will be good memories no matter how the race actually goes. Thank every single volunteer and encourage every other runner. Positivity is a performance enhancer. I want people to come up to you after the race and thank you for being so amazing. And then the last one, do not idealize this bleep. It will bleeping, wow, a lot of cursing. It will bleeping suck at some point. Right now, decide how you will respond. Never ever despair. We sign up for these things because they are difficult. Smile through the suck, laugh in the face of failure. So it just gets back to a lot of the stuff we were talking about where, you know, I like athletes to dream so big that it just horrifies them because that structures the daily process, right? Like, you know, with whatever big race, do you have any big races planned this year?
First marathon.
Oh, so exciting. When is it?
June 2nd.
June 2nd, perfect. Which one?
Rebel Road.
Oh, so good. Make sure. Awesome. Oh, yay. You're in good hands. And you're gonna crush it. So like for that race, you know, envision all, like it's great to like getting out there every day and thinking about.
That's the first time I said it.
I was so excited to see him like saying it, like all these things. It's so empowering. You know, when you're on your run, whether it's tomorrow or the next day if you're resting or whatever, like you're thinking about these good moments, and that drives you. You know, but once you actually get there, it's time to celebrate. You know, like no pressure at all. And not only does it not matter, it's not the point of the training. The point of the training is the training. So I'm super excited for you and your coach.
That brings up an interesting point about saying it out loud. Like say your big scary things out loud, like literally tell yourself that on your run. I think it's really helpful. We have Terrell Owens says, I love me some me, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. But if you look in the mirror and say that every day, it will you'll become more valuable.
We can do a chant now. I love, no, I'm just kidding.
Did we have a question in the back?
Kind of two-part question. Sorry to double load it. First of all, thank you guys so much, Anthony, David, Megan. First part is, what do you think? Like, you guys coach very elite athletes, but you also like kind of mid-packers as well. First part of the question is, what do you think the value is from a mid-pack or back-in-the-pack athlete who's like, hey, I'm not even really gonna like stand up, podium in my age group. I just want to improve my running. And then the second part relates to that, and like, do you think, like, most coaches I know came from an elite running background. What are the possibilities for someone from the mid-pack to relate their experiences getting through running to actually go into coaching?
So the question was about differences between mid-packers and elite athletes as performers and possibly as coaches.
It's an amazing question, super topical, because last week or two ago, we write a weekly article for a magazine, and the topic was, you are an elite athlete. It was directed to everyone. It got crazy pushback. Basically, the thing is, like, if you are striving to be the best you can be within the context of a life that is meaningful to you, you are an elite athlete to us, and I think you should be objectively to everyone else. So our perspective is that no matter what you're doing, if you're truly striving, you're elite. Like, we don't, I mean, honestly, we don't differentiate whatsoever with our own athletes. Yeah, I mean, we do literally everyone the same, and yeah, I mean, if we could never coach an elite athlete again, like, we'd be by elite, like, person finishing at the top, we wouldn't care. And then as it relates to coaching, I mean, I think that gets to a lot of the nuts and bolts of it. It doesn't matter in terms of like the quality of a coach whatsoever, like where their perspective is. The hard part is getting your foot in the door to coach athletes initially. But what we encourage, Megan's like the queen of encouraging people to do this, is we want everyone to coach. I mean, one of our missions is to try to help as many people as we can to start that process. Like, because once you light the fire, like once you get people, then it's about, you know, your coaching and not like maybe like something that gets someone to be interested in you coaching them. So yeah, I don't think results have nothing to do with quality of coach or anything like that. As long as you are striving, as long as you understand the lifestyle that you are asking people to undertake. That doesn't mean that you run 100 miles a week. It means that you're trying to be, you know, you're trying to reach your potential within the context of a life that is meaningful to you.
I'll answer to the coaching part of that. So there's so many great running books out there. Jack Daniels, Steve Magnus. It's like, just read as much as you can. And we encourage this to athletes who we encourage to coach. It's like, you know, just read. You can educate yourself on this, and, you know, have some fun with some of your friends. Try it by trial and error. And the other thing is I think it's kind of a ridiculous notion. It seems like there's this concept in running that you have to be an elite runner to coach. But it's like that concept applies across no other sports that I can think of. Like thinking about football, like I wonder how many football coaches could throw like a spiral, or, you know, probably most of them would be plowed by a defensive lineman. So I think that we need to debunk that concept. And I think the more people that coach, the easier that will become.
Yeah. And an amazing coach in the audience, Marissa, raise your hand. Just so everyone, if you're looking for a coach, Marissa is available. So.
I don't know if you know Jenny.
Oh no, I coach Marissa, so I'm like aware. But I'm sure there are a number of. But the point is, like, putting yourself out there and going for that, or literally anything else. Like your achievements. I mean, especially in running, we didn't get into this much, but like as it relates to like winning top races or whatever, that's mostly due to situations beyond your control. Like, no, you can't choose your parents. Genetics make a massive difference here, and so like, if we're elevating, you know, these people that win the biggest races as like these paragons of things we should strive to be, we're essentially like congratulating their parents for having sex. I mean, that's essentially. I've never said that before, and that's terrible. I've never said that. I debated that.
I'm going to take you up on your more nuts and bolts training question, and I enjoy reading your weekly articles in the magazines. That name will be unmentioned. What do you think the biggest hole in the science of understanding training for ultra running is right now?
What is the largest hole in the understanding of the science behind ultra running right now?
Thinking that there's any science of training for ultra running right now. So the problem in this field in particular, and this applies to all training theory, starts from the point of scientific principles of Megan's background, like medical, like how the body works, mixed with like putting stimuli on it, and how the body should react. And then that's mixed with how it actually works in the field, like empirical stuff, and then mixed with studies. And so the big problem here is that almost all training theory didn't develop from people being like, this is how the body should work based on like cellular reactions and things like that. It developed from people guessing and testing, and then later on it was validated via lab tests or whatever. One of the problems with ultra running in particular is that we're trying to study this stuff we're trying to learn about this stuff through studies, but we're not able to isolate all of the thousands of variables that go into performance. So, you know, essentially, with marathon running, for example, we have been pushing the limits of human performance for long enough that things are rather optimized at the top level. You know, what people are doing, independent of the doping considerations, is very, it's essentially different variations of very similar approaches. And with ultra running, meanwhile, I mean, performance isn't optimized whatsoever. Every single course record that's out there right now, even the untouchable ones, are going down by a substantial margin within the next 50 years, like every single one. Marathon times will just drop by a percentage or two. And so, yeah, like the science informs that, but what we need more of is like open dialogue about how we're doing things, and that's why we try to be open books with like what we do for our athletes, like putting training logs out there, things like that, and not thinking there's any secrets or answers yet beyond some of the like things that we're starting to come to, which a little bit beyond this. So yeah, what I would say is that, you know, if someone tells you they have all the answers in this or anything else, do not give them your credit card number. And you know, so acknowledging that there's the uncertainties, and then as it relates to specifics, I would say we don't actually understand how the body reacts long term to longer event stimuli. We don't know, you know, like if you do a 40-mile effort or whatever, if you're out there for 8 hours, what actually happens on the cellular level, on the mind-body level, neuromuscular level, that causes athletes to improve. We don't really know what the mechanism is there yet, which is super interesting, but also super daunting because, you know, we're trying to sell ourselves as coaches, but like we don't know the answer to that question.
Real briefly, I think the cool thing about ultra running and trail running is that you can be really creative in your approach to it. So different things work for a wide number of people. We talked about Cat Bradley, who is running 60 miles a week and winning Western States. But then you have Jim Walmsley, who runs 120 miles a week on his easy week, and that's all like super fast. And both work. And that's very different from something like marathon training where we have a lot of the answers. And so I think being willing to understand your own physiology and being willing to kind of experiment with it is important until we have more answers. And then the other point is just that chemical reactions in your body are really complex at mile 80 of a race, and it's very different for everyone, and also extremely hard to study. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see where this goes over the next couple of years.
Other questions?
Do you guys meditate?
Do they meditate?
In moderation.
I just started 4 days ago. Which I actually started a year ago, 4 days. I started a year ago and did it for like 2 weeks and then stopped. So I'm back at it. I'll let you know how it's going.
When we like early in our relationship, I would like lead Megan in like meditation with her, like staring up and like doing like really like I didn't know anything. So you can imagine what this was like leaving your body, all the worst stuff. Megan just gets up one day and is like, nope, can't do this anymore. We've come a long way though. I think we could do it now. But I
invited David to do it 2 days ago and he said no.
But that's a great question actually, and something that we addressed mindfulness in the book, but like didn't necessarily address the specifics of some of the like implications for day-to-day practice, or necessarily like specifics of spirituality that are lurking beneath the surface of everything we say, but we try not to kick the hornet's nest too much.
Okay, we probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions if there are any. Right here.
I'm curious if somebody is looking to get a coach and they approach you guys, and if their why is not strong enough, is that a reason why you would accept or not accept them for coaching?
The question was about a potential client's why, and if that influences whether or not they would be taken on as an athlete.
I don't really think so, because the issue is that like you don't need like a fully fleshed out why. You just need to ask the question, and not like approach it from like this like validation point of view. So yeah, I mean, like what we say in the book is like at the end, we're like, you know, we hit the ball. Like literally, all we want you to do is ask yourself these questions. Yeah, so for us, that's not a deciding factor.
I think we also have a lot of people who reach out to us, and we're able to refer them to other coaches too. And that's been something that's been meaningful to us, and hopefully to other coaches. So hopefully we can find the right fit for people too.
But yeah, that's an amazing question, because yeah, I think like an undercurrent of all this, like there's always, like in anything like this that tries to be a little bit more ambitious necessarily, there's an undercurrent of hypocrisy in everything you're saying. And we all feel that in our lives, I'm sure. And so, yeah, as you're reading it, know that like we fully are aware of maybe the things that seem a little bit counter to themselves while we're writing it, but that's life.
One more question? We didn't get to anybody?
I was just curious about what each of your individual relationships with running and with yourself, what that looked like in the transition from being athletes to being athlete coaches.
So a question about their own identities, relationships, and transitioning from runners to becoming coaches.
So I think the coolest story here, tangentially related, is Megan's current trajectory. So she went to Stanford Medical School, very good school, and I believe you're a running coach now, like only, right? And you know that she just graduated, and she's decided not to go to residency and things like that. And that took a crazy amount of courage and thought about who she is as a person and how she, like, you know, in this room it might be cool, but like literally everywhere else it's way less cool and way less impressive to the people, you know, to the external. And so, I mean, if you have any thoughts on that.
That's really kind, but running coaching also doesn't involve 100-hour work weeks or excessive vomiting or feet. So it was kind of an easy decision, but it does involve feet tangentially. But I actually found that through coaching I've become a lot kinder to myself. So I historically have been very hard on myself as a runner. And I think the thing that coaching has taught me is that these training cycles are long and continuous. So it's like when you coach, you plan out long training cycles, and you see that athletes who have injuries, they come back. Athletes who have bad races, they come back. And it consistently happens. And I think that's been easy, it's been helpful for me to see, is that through my own training cycles, is that not one matters so much, and it's been a lot easier to be kinder to myself too.
Yeah, the power of zooming out, like, you know, in your own stuff, like there's a reason Megan coaches me and I don't coach myself, like she can zoom out for me. So yeah, the power of like stepping outside and understanding that this is just this long process with literally everything you're doing in life has been like transformative. And I think that's the book kind of doesn't come from us and like our experiences. It comes from like trying to help other people zoom out just a little bit on their own journeys.
Great. And I think we're probably all set.
Hi, so anyone looking to buy the book, you can go ahead and do that, and then you guys will stay in your seats. I'm going to hand over pens, and you can get your copies signed. We do have a limited amount of books, but you can order them in with us, and we have a couple of plaques that I handed over to them, so you can still get your books customized.
Great. Let's give David and Megan another round of applause. Thanks, guys, for coming out.